Hello. How are you? Good to be here on a Wednesday night. It's Andy. This is the Dev Talk Show. It's Wednesday night. I'm here with, of course, Chris Gomez, who is working the controls
Yeah.
again. We've got a new scene set up, and
Yep.
you're talking, right?
I
And
think so. I think I'm
Bruno's there.
talking. I think you're
Yeah,
talking. I hope.
I hear you. We're talking. We are live. What looks like a smooth sailing. Meg is here, and Bruno are here. Hello, hello. It's great to have everybody with us tonight. I'm always excited when people are saying hi. Where's Rich? Well, Rich is having a busy work week, and that's the benefit of us having three, right? Is that we can always sort of keep it going, even if there's two. It's hard to do the show with one person, right?
Oh,
It's
you sure?
more fun to do it with a group,
Yeah.
right? And I think we all like it when there's three, but we take time off and we have fun with that. I don't know what's going on with you, Chris. What's up?
Yeah. So today in the U.S. and maybe other places, of course, is St. Patrick's Day, and so I'm here in green, and I even tried to encourage my daughter to wear green to school today, but she said nah, and she wasn't worried. She figured she'd take care of any troublemakers. But here I am, and like you said, we are already in March of 2021. Even 2021 is flying. It's going to be end of first quarter before we know it. Just crazy, right? It just keeps marching on. But we've been having a lot of fun here on the show. This year we've already talked about making games for your Xbox or just making games for the web. We had that great show about, we kind of told how we got our first dev jobs and then gave advice on hopefully to help people out getting their first dev jobs, and then asked the audience for advice because I recognize that I got my first dev job so long ago that I want to make sure the advice is relevant.
Yeah, definitely. That is a good idea to make sure the advice is relevant. I mean, it's never stopped me before from giving out, but it's a good idea to have relevant and just a lot of people have a lot of ideas on this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, things are different. It's not, I certainly didn't interview the same way. And we're going to talk about that tonight. I mean, when I went to an interview, heck, for many, until very recently, you actually got dressed and you went somewhere and you got greeted at the front and probably asked to wait somewhere, and maybe someone else came out and got you. And that's not how people were interviewing in 2020. I'm
yeah,
guessing.
I'm guessing too. So I haven't done an interview post COVID yet, but we're getting ready. Actually, my company is getting ready to do some of that, and we're actually still trying to figure it out a little bit. Like, what do we do differently? How does it look? What's the new how do we incorporate the new normal and all that kind of stuff in? And so I'm actually looking forward to this conversation because I've got some ideas. I know you have some ideas. I'm sure our viewers have some ideas, and I think between all of that, we're going to come up with some. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a fun show, and this is like the follow up to that show we had. What was the What did
Yeah.
we talk about? It was like a month ago, maybe. I don't know, but it was
Yeah,
an
it was
active show with the audience
right.
participation on. That was the show we talked about first jobs,
Yeah, first
right?
jobs, and then maybe it'll help you get your first job, right? But because what happened is it sort of morphed into that, as we said, hey, let's talk about our first tech jobs, and then a lot of people in the audience said, well, hold on, how do you suggest I go about this, or go about getting my resume through the screening, automated screening? That's where we learned that great tip from that viewer who said, yeah, how do I get my resume through the automated screeners? And we were both like, man, I never even dealt with that before. How do you even know that that's what's happening? Oh, because when somebody clicks on my resume, I can get that notification and that percentage. And I was like, man, times have changed. Right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, I think the big companies use these screeners, and maybe the recruiters use the screeners and things like that. I've not used it. I guess I can I say I'm like proud to say I've never used one of those because I don't know if that's like a good thing. It doesn't. They don't feel like good tools.
it,
They feel a little.
not really
Um,
human, right? to just
Right. Not really
basically
human.
throw people out without getting any chance to talk to them because there aren't the right buzzwords, or I
You
don't
know,
know.
you could say they're not opinionated, and that sounds like a compliment that they're not opinionated, right? They just go by the facts, but I think it's a time when an opinion can be helpful, right? Where there's like a judgment call or a feeling, and you say, well, this candidate actually looks pretty good on paper, you know. So I think there's a lot there, but you know, um,
Yep. So I took a stab at dividing this into a couple parts, and
and I added some notes to your
right.
thing. Chris and I actually we don't always have notes in advance, like to that we share. You know, we try to like kind of go off a lot of times, you know, ad hoc on the show, but we did kind of want to throw some notes together for this. And so Chris, I
Yeah.
added some stuff in there as well from slightly different perspective, I think. So maybe we can like sort of combine all this and go through it. You want to lead this whole thing, and I'll just,
Well,
you know,
first we thought there's general tips just for the interview that doesn't have anything to do with the actual, time you spend. But then you get questions, and what inspired that was that somebody asked us on that show, like, hey, wouldn't it be great to go over how to answer some of the common interview questions? And I kind of thought that kind of gets divided into two topics, because you get asked technical questions in interviews, but you also get asked non-technical questions, right? But before we even start that off, I'm curious, and I'll relate my own experience in a second. Did you ever
yeah.
take any kind of course, whether it was in college or high school, or maybe even junior high, or I don't want to even say it was a course that you took, but was there ever an academic setting where they sat down, they took the class and they said, we want to talk to you about resumes and interviewing. We're going to practice it in class. Just to let you know, my answer is we did that in high school. I don't know if they do it
Yeah.
anymore. And it was
So
only for a couple weeks.
yeah, when I went to high school, it was kind of hard because you know, we had a horse and buggy at the time, and it would lead us in, and then you know, we only went to school until I think it was like, you know, the fifth grade. And then I just basically worked outside. No, it was a long time ago. I don't exactly remember. I feel like though at some point, and I think it was in college, I recall getting, you know, advice on this kind of stuff. I think that some of our classes had this in college. I don't know if it was in high school,
Mm-hmm.
but I definitely remember going and like learning about somewhere, you know, about building a resume, what kind of things should go on there, and you know, different things like that. Um, Meg
Yeah.
said she did not have that in college, and try Goofy dressed up for mock interviews, and I think that's the right thing to do. Now that's Drexel, right? And that's a really good thing to do.
Right. Right.
I can tell you that I think part of my experience came from family members. I do recall doing mock interviews with like my sister, who's a couple years older than me, and other people like really saying to me like, practice this before you go in. So, you know, I do remember doing that kind of stuff, but I don't remember how official it was.
Yeah, I don't know if it was just something we did locally, but in my high school there was a couple weeks taken out where we were supposedly learning what to put on a resume, but here was the thing. The reason I brought it up partially too was there were some mock interviews conducted in the class with the teacher, and they actually talked, like, we watched a video. Except when I say video, what I really meant was film strip. And I'm telling you, if you've watched some of those early season episodes of The Simpsons, in fact, they might still make fun of it now. I mean, The Simpsons has only been on the air for 31 years, right? Where they would show a film in class, and it would be on an old film strip, reel to reel. So I hate to say it, but that's what I watched this on, and it was how to prepare, how to interview. And I'm telling you, it looked like it was from the 60s, and they actually talked about when you enter the room, observe the seating arrangement, and you were supposed to like get right the chair to sit in, across from the interviewer and things like that. And the funny thing about it is and the reason I bring it up is in the end, I never found any of that to be practical. None of that advice. I'm not trying to say there isn't a degree of professionalism. Of course there is. But the little advice like sit here, not there. Expect to, to stay standing until the interviewer sits. I mean, especially today, that would be very awkward, right?
Well, I got some feedback. I remember hearing this once, and it was for job interviews and other meetings, that they said you should mimic. This is interesting, and I used to try to do this in interviews. I have no idea if it worked, right? Zero idea. You guys might laugh about this. But someone was saying there was a theory that said you should mimic the breathing patterns and the posture of the person you're talking to. So when they sit back, you sit back. When they sit in, you sit in, right? And you should sort of watch, and like, honestly, they said, like, look at the breathing patterns and try to, they said the theory was that you would get on a wavelength, right? Somehow you would adapt and that person would feel comfortable with you because you were, you would sort of be on this wavelength. Now, I have no idea. Yeah, Contrived says that sounds like something from The Office. It really does. This was going back many years, and we're getting all kinds of great comments.
Yeah,
out here.
I love what Brendan
I like
said.
Brendan. Yeah, just tower over
I
people. Great
prefer
idea. Well, I remember another thing that said you were supposed to, from a posturing thing, as a boss, you would want to raise your chair up higher, and so there was an intimidation factor that people would have when people would go into the boss's office. Certain bosses, would lower the chair that the person was meeting with them, so they would feel, so that the boss would seem superior to them or something like that. And that was also something I think maybe people try to do, intimidate in interviews, all sorts of crazy stuff. I mean, we're going way off,
Well, that's just it, right? Is that I think there's that kind of generic advice that I'm really not sure. As we'll get to later, I'm not sure how useful it is, but we've also talked a little bit about how these interviews are being conducted over Zoom now, right? So, like, I guess we can get some of the easy stuff out of the way. Be early. Connect to the Zoom early, right? Don't be there 2 minutes late at least.
Yeah, I mean, you should always be early for an interview. That's the bottom line, right? You should always be early for an interview. The question is, how early? Try Goofy says, test your audio and video, by the way. Great tip when it comes to that kind of thing.
Also not bad. Also not bad if you have a show on Wednesday nights at 8:30.
Test your audio and video, right? Very good. Yeah. So, how early do you get on for I mean, you don't want to get on like 10 minutes early when it's like a Zoom or we're going to use the term like Zoom interview, but it could be Teams, it could be whatever, right? Zoom, what we'll call it.
It's fine.
Meg says 5 minutes.
I don't think that's horrible, right? It's not pretentious.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not I mean, it's not it's not like you're trying not to appear eager or anything. It's just that, for one thing, if you are, it is plausible on some platforms, although I don't think this would happen, that maybe the interviewer uses that personal meeting over and over and over. I really don't think that's how it would go, but you never know, right? So showing up a half an hour early, they might be in the middle of something. But 5 minutes is fair, right? It's fair.
And for in-person interviews, I don't know if you guys have done this. Here's a tip that I used to do, and it served me well. I would go early. I would sit in the parking lot. Like, no way was traffic going to be a problem with me. I would go a half hour early or whatever. And I've heard someone else, a friend of mine, did this, and I've done this too. Is go the day before, and like make sure you know your way around. Like like sometimes it's not as easy as you think. You know what I mean? And like make sure you can find the place. And I've actually sort of driven by places a little bit too, but other people have told me they've gone a day before. But I'm talking about in the old days when we had to drive to interviews.
I don't really disagree with what Meg's saying here, is that considering that it's Zoom and our clocks are probably not that far off compared to, wall clock type situations.
Right.
The point is, you don't want to be 5 minutes late. You don't want to be 10 minutes late. You don't want to waste the interviewer's time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, here's someone who says they actually conduct some Zoom interviews. That's pretty good. If the candidate is using a bad mic. I'll use the word bad. Bad mic, and I can barely hear them. There's a ton of background noise. It's going to be a short interview. Yeah, I think that's fair advice. Like you got to set yourself up for an environment, right? I have had times where I've done phone screens with people and they've said to me like up front, listen, I'm sorry, I'm at work, I just ran outside, I'm standing out in front of the building, or I'm sitting in my car just for a couple minutes to do like a quick phone screen, but they told me up front, and I thought that was okay. But if we're going to be on like a long interview, I do think it's important to find a quiet space. Boy, there's all kinds of good tips coming in from everybody. This is great.
Yeah, silence or turn off your phone. And I like Richard Corkery says, I've done that in a case where I just wasn't 100% sure where the place was. I drove to the address, and it turns out it was a good thing I did because they had moved. And so I drove to this like parking lot that just seemed, there are buildings here, but it seems like nobody's here. I mean, the parking lot shouldn't be empty. So I called back in, and there's like, oh, you have the old address. And so, good thing, right?
Yeah, that is a good thing. But so, I mean, I keep doing this because I keep bringing us back to old. We probably should like focus on the current thing, which I guess is going to be, Zoom or virtual, right? Yep. So we've got some great tips about what time to get there. What about like what to wear? Like that's a question we have. Like now this is a Zoom meeting. It's a whole different ball game. And for people that have done Zoom interviews or virtual interviews or have conducted some, any tips? This is an area where I'm so confused, especially when my company has gone so casual now anyway, right? Even when we were in the office, my company was at like, shorts and t-shirts kind of organization. But, what do you think, Chris?
So I probably stuck to the shirt and tie longer than most folks did because my feeling was it didn't matter if I showed up and they were all business casual or casual. I'm here to ask for a job. So I kind of expected that my feeling is that the people interviewing you or meeting you are going to understand. Like you're here in a special situation. You're not trying to show them up. It's just, it's not like I showed up in, I didn't say it was a jacket. It was just like a shirt and tie. I did that for a long time.
You're talking about
that was in person.
Interviews?
That was in person.
Oh, in person. Oh, I wore
as time has gone by,
every last interview I've ever had.
As time has gone by, I changed to more of like the, polo shirt and khakis type thing, and that seemed to have been fine and even overdressed in a lot of cases. But I would say that now, considering Zoom, I can give you a little bit of feedback that I would still go for that business casual that I would feel comfortable at just about any office place anywhere, because I think in just about everywhere now is business casual. I'm sure there are some exceptions. Even you see them on Wall Street in, polo shirts and khakis and obviously that business casual dress for women. I think that's still a good idea even on Zoom. I know that means that you don't, the camera's probably not going to catch you below, here. So, just don't make
someone said in here, Try Goofy said pants are optional.
Yeah. Don't make it look like you're in your pajamas. Don't make it look like you just woke up. Right?
So, I think the general consensus is, at least for the men, wear a collared shirt, right? A long sleeve, maybe even a golf shirt in the summer at the very least, right? But a nice shirt. As for women, I hate to say, this is an area where I hate to even start to say things because I'm already making an implication that there's a different standard for women. Because you could say, well, women wear a dress shirt with a collar. I don't know.
Well, the main thing is I'm not gonna. I don't want to dictate that fashion because it doesn't have to. I just said polo shirt and khakis, but that doesn't have to be a uniform. So
Meg, feel free to jump in, and she has a comment here. Women get judged harsher, and I think she's right. Yeah. I really do. I mean, just from from politics, right? We're watching women candidates on, they definitely get judged harder. That is wrong, right? We're
Yep.
not condoning that,
Yeah,
but we're
absolutely
stating
not.
a fact, right? Like, hopefully we don't judge women
Right.
harder, but I think that there's something there.
It
I
shouldn't
think
be. It
Meg's
shouldn't be
right.
at all. I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I guess what I think is fair to say is there's a professional attire for everyone that doesn't necessarily require to to look better. Like you shouldn't have to be twice as dressed. And I just I hate to say that I'm not going to be able to define it because I don't want to fall back to I'll know it when I see it. But it's just I don't feel like it should be that way, but and it shouldn't be at all. Like
Yeah,
absolutely not.
right. So, all right. So we talked a little bit about clothes. What's next?
Well, you're going to, that breaking that ice, those first few minutes, I think sometimes this is where maybe we flip it around and say, as an interviewer, is there any, are there any techniques or tips that you have for how to make the first 30 seconds, I think, comfortable and put the candidate at ease so that you get the honest picture of them. I mean, we all that's what we really need. We could talk about how like you got to rise to the occasion, and I say, you know what? We need to know the reality is it's hurting the business if I don't know how you really are, and if I get the nervous, distracted or nervous or anxious, and I kind of cause that, I might be costing the business a great candidate. That responsibility goes both ways, and I'm curious what you have as tips for how do you start things off.
So, first off, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that a candidate has a responsibility to, step up, right? But it's our, and I could talk more about this even when it comes to different questions we ask, but it's our job as an interviewer to to get the best out of the candidate, right, to find out for ourselves. So I couldn't agree with you more. In person, I usually start off with one of these like, how is the drive over? Or, wow, it's, a little weather question. It's hot out. Just to say, oh, sorry you had to come in on a day like today, with the weather. Just a little soft icebreaker. I think on a virtual interview, I would start off maybe with something about like, wow, I can't believe we're doing interviews over Zoom now, new for me, just sort of like a light, how are you doing kind of question. And I do think you want to give someone, well, let's go with it this way. If anyone's ever been on stage for any reason, like as a singer, a performer, some sort of thing like that, or whatever it is, or making a presentation in an uncomfortable environment, the first couple words are the hardest to get out, right? You feel uncomfortable, right? So give people like a softball, like let them start talking, let them hear their voice, right? Let them get their, okay, I'm doing it, I'm speaking, let them just get their words out. And I think that's the way to go. CTI Geek on there saying, yep, my goal for the first 5 minutes is to show that I'm not threatening or hostile. Right. That is a great way to put it. I think. I think that's a really great way to put it. I'm not threatening or hostile. I'm here to talk. I think that's what I've meant, but I've never said it just like that. I
Yeah,
think it's
right.
perfect.
Yeah. So I like this answer here. I start with an agenda these days, introduce myself, the company, and the role. Then I go to them and even provide them with the first question. So
Prov-
I,
yeah.
I think it is important that because we didn't want to just talk about being in the interviewee's chair, but also that there's tips for interviewers too. It's not, uh, despite what you might think, it's not a gotcha game. It's not a trivia quiz. Because if you treat it that way, you're probably going to cost your company good candidates. It's the opportunity to find out, who is a good prospect for us that will bring, all the skills that we need. Um, the things that we want to find out is the skills that we need, and then also even the viewpoints that we need that we're missing here in the organization. And if you spend too much time looking for folks that 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 are trying to, you've got a bingo card, but you've kept it a secret from the player, and they've got to score bingo, then you're actually just hurting your own company. So
That's true, Chris, but not but
yep,
like of course that is
yep,
true.
but more, yeah,
But yeah, so the but is that's not always the case, right? So people that are, here, I think looking for advice, they might be up against that manager or that
oh
hiring
yeah,
manager, I'll
sure,
call it,
yep,
who's just not going to be good like that. And sometimes this is a person even more senior that you're not even going to be working for, but wants to come in and try to trip you
yep,
up in the interview,
yep,
maybe to prove their prowess and oh, I tripped up that. Look, I've always tripped up the people, and I find the bad ones, I weed them out, like that kind of person. And so it's probably good that we talk about, how to deal with that, even though that's not you, that's not me, hopefully, right? But there are people like that. And so a candidate sort of has to be prepared for both. And you could say, well, you don't want to work there anyway with that person. But hey, that's not always a simple decision.
yeah,
People need a job. And we don't want to say, oh, it's so easy to just walk away, right?
right,
So I think a candidate needs to be prepared for some of that, and sort of be mentally prepared on their own to be relaxed and be in the right place if the interviewer doesn't put you at ease, right?
yeah. I mean, easy for me to say that, like, because I see that a lot of times in these conversations is, well, you didn't want to work there anyway, and it's like, well, easy for me to say, you know. Uh, it's so that's partially why I know that I've been a little harsh on the interviewers, but it's because I do want to see that kind of reform. But
Yeah.
how do you deal with it? So for example, let's maybe we'll start like look, we need some softball questions too, right? Um, what is some of the first things that you get? One of the first questions that you often get, I have heard, is things like, well, why do you want this job? And why do you want to work for us? And so, what are some of what I know? There's no. I want to be careful. I don't want to make it sound like there's a right answer, but I can imagine there are categories of topics that you're hoping to hear when you ask somebody, "Hey, what is it that excites you about this role?" or "Why do you want to work for us?"
Yeah. Well, so I don't always ask that question,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
But
Well,
I
then,
do think,
yeah.
first of all, no, but I think we can talk about that because when I do ask a question like that, there are things I'm looking for, right? But let me just say, this is a case where if I was giving a candidate advice, I would say to try to turn those questions around,
Okay.
right? Now, maybe that's wrong. Maybe you could disagree with that. But there's a time when you want to turn the question around and remind the company, the interviewer, what you bring to the table, right? Like if someone says, well, and I see some joking, things where people in the chat are saying, I want money and stuff like that. But I've heard people say, and I've had people say to me, well, I really want to work here for such and such a reason, right? And I'm like, that's not helping me at all. Like, you want to work here because you heard, that we work with the latest technology or things like that. That might be good in some ways. Like, it really depends on where the candidate's coming from a little bit. But I think it's more important if someone asks me, why do you want to work here? I would try to answer the question, but turn it into like, well, I really want to work here because, I can see you guys are using the latest technology, XYZ. And I've been working on XYZ for about 3 years now. And I feel like I can bring a lot of my experience with XYZ to your organization. Like, it's kind of good to sort of give remind the company what they're gaining from having you coming to work. Like, they should be lucky to have you, kind of thing.
Okay.
Now, you might not agree with that answer. That's probably the way I would answer that question if it was me. What are you looking for with that question?
So I kind of agree with you that it's not a question I typically ask, but I have been asked many times. So what I've done is I try to prep by doing whatever research I can about what the company does. What is the problem they're trying to solve? What is the mission statement that either is straightforwardly available, or maybe I can sort of glean from like watching them. Like, for example, if you were interviewing at like IBM, the question might be, what's IBM's mission statement? And that's, we could probably go look it up, but it's certainly not as straightforward as for example, like let's say we picked PayPal and we say, well, we know what PayPal does. They facilitate financial transactions, right? So I guess maybe that's their mission statement. But a company like that, when they're bigger, it can be hard to express this passion about what they're doing because they're big and established. So it's not like a smaller company where you're saying, okay, you know, this smaller company is doing something that I consider to be like a good cause. And I don't want to make it sound like a charity, but I like what you're specifically doing. You're solving this problem. Maybe, hey, let's say it's like a video game developer. You know what? I really enjoy video games. I have a passion for them. I've been playing them for quite a while on various platforms, and I've always been interested in being a part of creating the stories, bringing them to life, and creating fun experiences for players at home of all ages, right? So, a little easier. I'm not sure how you answer it for like a huge company. Then you might want to concentrate more on the role, because how do you relate to like a big? Well, go ahead.
But you sort of did the same thing I'm saying, right? Yeah. You expressed a common interest, a passion, right? And then you turned around and you didn't just say, well, I just think it would be really cool to work at a gaming company. You said, and I really want to be a part of making that story, right? And so as the interviewer, what they're hearing is, hey, this is a person who's got passion. Like, we're on the same page, right? That's what you did. You might not have realized it, right? But you, and maybe you did, you know, but you sort of told them what they're getting from bringing you on board. They're getting that passion, right? And I see in the chat here, people, of course, talk about, you know, listen, if they're curing cancer, like, that's a different story, right? Not every company is like that. You know, if you're working at a company that really is like saving the world. I wish, you know, I work at an insurance company. I don't always give out too many details about where I work, but it's an insurance company, and we do great things. I really like my company. But I wouldn't say we're like saving the world. And I think if I look historically at all the companies that I've not worked for one of those companies that sort of, you know, making that special difference. I wish, well, I'm not looking for work, you know, but I would love, I think it would always be great to work in an organization like that. That would be cool. So that's that. We're checking comments here before if we're going to move on.
So there's some good ones on some things that we talked about a little earlier, but still, like, I thought this was interesting, and I had it queued up for a while. We were talking about Zoom, and think about what's in the background, right?
I saw that comment.
It might even seem innocent. You know, making wallets from used bike inner tubes. It might have looked interesting. I will tell you that I turn around and look to see, you know, what's back there, and it's mostly books and toys. I don't know that anybody else has spotted anything else. There's nothing special about it, but I think that's important. And then I also thought, try goofy. Look at the interviewer's surroundings, you know, saw a Portland Marathon poster and spent the first 10 minutes talking about running.
Right. Smart move. Listen, so right now, if you were, if I was interviewing you, Chris, what would be an easy opening?
Well, I mean, behind you, the posters and the speakers, you know. So, are you into music, or do you play, or?
Right.
Here's the problem. Let me tell you why I would avoid that, because I don't play or know anything about music, so I would be afraid. In my case, it's not that I wouldn't want to hear you talk about it.
No, you're right.
It's just that I don't want to pretend that I'm on your wavelength, because I'm not.
And so how would it go? This is an interesting, let's play this one out.
Right.
So you say, oh, so you're into music. And I go, oh, yeah. Oh, you saw my poster. Yeah. Big Beatles fan. How about you? And you go, nah. Now what? Right. So you're right. You want to pick out the things that you have that connection with, right? Yeah. Or just play it straight along and You know,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm looking here at
Well, like let's say
all these comments.
I don't see them in your background right now, but I know that in the expanded view, I think sometimes there's a guitar. So what I
Yep.
wouldn't say, I'm not trying to say I would avoid it, but I wouldn't try to pretend that like, oh, this common interest. But if I
Yeah.
said
Right.
like, hey, I'm into the Beatles too, that's cool. And then I was like, do you play some of the music? Like I don't play, but I'm just fascinated by people who can play music because
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
I've never been able
Yeah.
to. And then let's move on, right? Like there's no need to dwell on
Yeah.
it.
Right. Right. Right.
So
And you don't want to be stalkery with some of that stuff too, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
don't want to be like, oh, you're. I see the kids in the background.
yeah,
Oh
yeah, yeah.
yeah, your
That's
kid's
creepy,
wearing a
right?
T-shirt. That did they go to Smith Elementary School? You know, like oh, nah, you're crossing the line, right? So let's be careful with that one. You know, and I am not into EDM. Try goofy. You know, by the way, CTI Geek. Throwing out some comments today also about like reading the job description. Now we haven't even gotten into the the
Yep.
technical questions, but yeah, and I think someone else said earlier about do a little research before you go in an interview. Let me ask you this: do you research? So you're the candidate. Do you research the person you're going to be meeting with if you know their name?
You know, I have not done that a whole lot. Um, at least, and almost intentionally, I try to not. I don't want to like go crawling around. But there was one case where the CTO, when you typed in their name, it turned out that they were kind of well known and had published some papers, and so it wasn't such a horrible thing to go read those. Like that's professional work. I didn't feel weird.
Right.
Maybe I'm missing out on that. Maybe I am, but I have not done the LinkedIn. Maybe I'll find their blog when they're interviewing me.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't done that.
Yeah. So I've always done that, right? And sometimes I find nothing, right? Now, let me just tell you, I can flip this around. And here's an interview tip if you're ever coming to meet me, right? Now, if you're listening to the show, you might know who I am. And there's not a lot of secrets of the kind of things in tech that I'm passionate about. We talk about them here on the show, right? So I've often thought to myself that if you're coming into an interview with me and you're not prepared for some of these questions, I thought to myself, wow, I don't think it would be hard to know the kind of things that Andy, like, is the interviewer, is passionate about because you can go to my blog, you can go to the show,
Yeah.
you can look at some of the topics and be like, I bet I can give myself a little leg up in the interview. Like, now don't come in and say, oh, Andy, I think, not that anyone's ever saying this, but Andy, you're great. I'm a big fan of the show. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is give yourself an advantage and do the research. Find out that, like you said, the person wrote a paper on something, and that's something that relates. Maybe I can mention that. And quite frankly, if you mention it in a certain way, it only shows the interview. I did my homework. I'm prepared. I want this job. I did my homework, right? I think it's really good to come in prepared.
Yeah, yeah. And so, to that point, we're probably being looked at as well. So, like Richard Wysocki says, LinkedIn should be current to the resume as well, and that's definitely
Hmm.
true.
On both sides, right? You're saying the candidate and
Yeah.
the interviewer, like give them something to look at you on. Put your recent jobs on there. I mean, not everybody does because they say, "Oh, I'm not looking for work." But
Or
as a
I just don't think
candidate,
about it for months and months and years where I'll be like, oh, wow, I didn't even bother updating that, I have a new job. That's
right?
happened to me. I've done that. Maybe
So
even,
so for you,
I
it
don't know.
makes sense. But let me speak to Richard's point, right?
Yeah.
Richard Wysocki's point. I will tell you that I sometimes look at LinkedIn. Not sometimes. I probably generally will look at somebody's LinkedIn profile when they're coming in to meet with me for an interview. And I've had times where their LinkedIn page is just disconnected from their current skills. Maybe it's 2 years behind or something like that. And I think to myself, this person's serious about looking for a job? Like, how, if that's the way now there could be different circumstances. Sometimes people aren't really looking for work and we get hold of them and say, come on in and talk to us. We want to meet you. That's different. But when someone is like actively looking for a job, I think to myself, they didn't update their LinkedIn page. They're not doing everything they can to find a job. How are they going to be as an employee? What detail-oriented skills are they going to have? It's following up. and making sure everything is working and going out of their way to make sure that whatever project we're working on is going to be like happening, right? If they're not taking their livelihood into their own hands and like updating their LinkedIn and keeping these things, like to me it's like a code smell.
Yeah, okay. I understand what you're saying. Yep. You know, I do agree with something that Meg said a little while ago. Is a lot of these job descriptions, they might be written by someone else, or maybe even the hiring manager didn't put a lot of time and effort into it, and they were busy, and so it becomes this laundry list of skills and abbreviations, and now you've got people out there thinking they're not qualified when what you've really done is asked for a unicorn to come in and interview because the person just doesn't exist, that
Oh
has
yeah.
has all of those skills. But um,
Can you hear
let's
me
see.
okay?
I'm hearing you okay. How about if anybody?
No, I'm hearing you. Something happened with my headphones. All of a
Oh,
sudden, they
okay,
got like quieter, and I
okay.
thought like, oh, did I just like something weird happen? But it's okay. If I'm good, I'm good.
So
Um,
let's try a different question.
yeah, yeah,
What
right.
about when you are? Have you ever been asked a question? And there's two sides of this coin. Tell us about a time when you succeeded on a task or a project you were working on. What did you learn and what helped you succeed? And then I think we can also go into, because I have been asked both sides of this. I've been asked the other question too. Tell us about a time you failed at a task or project. What did you learn? What caused the failure, and how did you improve? I've been asked both of those, and
I actually asked
yeah.
the latter question.
Okay.
That's a sort of a standard one. Tell me about something that went wrong. I I have to say though, I kind of like asking what went well and what you learned. I think that's a really good interview question.
So I
It's not
froze.
as obvious.
I froze on the failed one. I froze big time.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
It caught me by surprise, and I didn't think maybe it should have. And it wasn't. I wasn't trying to be coy. I wasn't trying to be dishonest. It was on this. And then when I say this, I want to make it clear. Um, I'm not talking about at the beginning of my career. So, and the reason I want to make that clear is because I think people should understand that even though I've been doing this quite a while, I have all the same anxiety. I still get nervous, and I still flub interviews, which we can talk about later, because I definitely have. But I thought that I was ready for most things, and I was not ready for that question because I was searching for something. I wanted to come up with a failure that like I learned from. So I was stopping and thinking, and I was specifically not trying to come up with like that quasi failure of like, oh, but everything turned out in the end, because I thought they would
Right.
think I wasn't being fair or genuine to the question,
Right.
and I couldn't find it. So I did sort of kind of go for something where, well, this didn't go so well, but kind of went back, and yes, it was a really tough time and it wasn't great for the customer, and we fixed it, a little while later. Maybe that was the right response, but I remembered that one because it caught me. It caught me big time.
Well, you know, as an interviewer, and this again is the now we're flipping around and talk about the interviewer's responsibility. I think in my feedback on what you just said, the there are different questions we ask in an interview. Some questions are yes or no answers, right? Some questions there's just that the candidate can answer, and you might think they're right, you might think they're wrong, right? But sometimes we ask these open-ended questions about something that might have happened in their career, and it's really hard to sometimes go like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, I gotta, you know, I can't. Sometimes you can't think about one of those, and it's okay. I would just move on to the next question. Like, it is okay to just be like, that's a good question. I'm sure I have had plenty of problems. I'm not trying to say that I am not, oh, I never have failure. Of course I have problems on some projects, but what did I learn? Like, I'm trying to think of an example, and, uh, sometimes it's just hard
Do
to,
you
to
think it's
find those.
okay to ask to come back to it if you're really trying to be genuine? It's
I
so
think
hard to
it's
know, right?
okay to ask to come back to it. I think you might be like, let's keep talking, and let's keep talking about other things. And I'm going to sort of have that and you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if, like, while we're talking about things and we're talking about other projects, all of a sudden that's going to pop in my head. And, um, I don't know. I think it's okay to say, can we come back to that? I want to, like, sort of think about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, what you don't want to do is lie, right? Like, lying is bad. Don't make things up,
Right.
And if you don't know if you don't have a story to tell, then, um, now this is a good reason why it's good to go on a lot of interviews, by the way. Here's a tip, by the way. Go on lots of interviews, right? Hear lots of questions. I used to go on interviews, and I'm going to say something here. Like, I'm usually these days the interviewer, and I don't necessarily want my time wasted. I'll be honest. However, when I was a candidate, I used to go on interviews, right? It doesn't look that great, but I'm going to go on that interview anyway. It's like good practice, right? Or ask friends to take you through and what kind of questions and research, because there are questions out here like you just asked a question that's a pretty common question. If we can be prepared for the ones
Yeah.
that were common, we're getting ourselves ahead of the game, and I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. So I'm not gonna put a stake in the ground here tonight because people are different, interviews are different. I think I prefer the tell me about something you succeeded, and part of it is because I want to hear that story. And what I'm hoping to get from the candidate is both the technical side, but also just the human side, which has nothing to do with the technical part, nothing to do with it. And I will even try to see if I can get excited about what they're talking about, like really lean in, say this is, so that they get the impression from me, like, this is a great story, because I want them to just keep pouring forth. I want to hear from them. And in fact, if I don't have to answer any questions because they're volunteering this, then I think that's great. But, that's just me. I am not much of the pop quiz interviewer. I don't like it. And it doesn't mean the technical skills aren't important, but I don't like it, and I want to find ways for it to come out in the discussion where I will be confident that without asking you specifically to show me how to write a left out or join, I'm very confident that you understand database querying just because of the conversation we've had about your projects and experience and what you've done. I say, look, this person clearly isn't making it up, and I don't have to give them a pop quiz. Doesn't mean you won't get them, though. So,
I think a lot of interviewers do the pop quiz kind of things. I don't. Like, I would typically say, you were talking about, like, outer joins or something like that. So let's, SQL example. A typical question I ask as an interviewer, like, I start off a topic with a real softball, open-ended question, like, tell me what you know about SQL, or tell me about your experience with SQL Server. Let them sell that. Let them just get in and tell the story. Well, I got to tell you, a couple of years ago in my career, I did a lot of SQL, and or I'll say, like, how do you use it? Let them explain things. You start to tell. Are they just doing, well, I'm pretty good at doing some queries, when I do my if I'm doing some research, I know how to query the tables or something like that. If that's what they're saying, then I can probably assume that they're not a DBA. Like, they're not going right to, like, well, I can tune a database. Without asking a hard, firm question, I can get a pretty good feel for where someone, sort of fits in the bigger categories. And then I can ask follow-up questions from that. But I like to let people sort of level set for me by me asking an open-ended question. And often they nail it right from that question. Like, they take it and they start talking. That's what an interview candidate is supposed to do. Here's a tip, by the way. As a candidate, oh my gosh, Chris, this goes back to the first question you asked, which is, did you learn these things? And yes, someone told me this many, many years ago, right? Is that as a candidate, you want to control the interview. You want to talk about the things where you excel. Now, again, you don't want to like keep diverting back,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to keep diverting back. But when someone asks you an open-ended question and you're a whiz, like at that same question I had, you're a whiz with SQL, and you just know that from a developer standpoint, you're a great developer, but you know your SQL skills are like higher than, start talking. Don't be like, oh, yeah, sure, I work with SQL. Start telling the story. Start owning that part. Take a couple minutes, right? Like really talk about it. Now, someone may cut you off, right? But I'm looking at Chris. Is that you? All data
Yeah.
begins and ends in Excel.
Yeah.
Nice. Um, but I do think it's important to take those open-ended questions and rock those questions. Like dive in and take that part of. So let's just say with SQL, I'm really great. I've written stored procs that have joins and stuff like that, but I'm not really good at indexing. Again, I'm just kind of grasping at something here on the SQL topic, right? So don't start by talking about indexing. Start going in and shine on those areas you start shining on. Don't be like, well, I'm not that great with indexing, but, like, no, let me tell you something. I've been working with SQL for a while, and I got to tell you, I don't use it every day, but, certainly comes up from time to time, and I've written some lengthy stored procedures where necessary, and I'm pretty fluent in joining and optimizing my queries, and like as soon as you start saying those kind of things, like that's what I'm hearing, and I'm like, okay, I see where this person's strengths are.
Yeah.
I kind of went long on that answer.
No, it's okay. I mean, so I think because there are it's a technical interview. It doesn't matter what you're, if you're here tonight and you're a Ruby developer and you're looking for a Ruby position, the question listen, I'm going to be honest, I find it difficult to figure out how much I should dive in. And we have this feedback here from CTI Geek saying don't be afraid to ask basic questions to start. And
Right.
The reason I want to highlight this is because even though I'm telling you that I've had difficulty with it, knowing just how much should I treat this like a quiz at school, and when should I move on, is because I had a manager. This was a long time ago. Someone who I thought did a great job, hired good people, was a good manager, who said, I got to look at. He just so happens though that I moved under him after joining this company. I didn't interview with him because I might not have gotten the job if I interviewed with him. And what I found is that he was just going in the interview asking, what might be considered basic questions. And he said, let me tell you, the first time you hire somebody who snowballed you in the interview, and you cannot get rid of them, because it doesn't matter. And listen, I know every company is different, but it can be very difficult to just let them go. It can be hard. It's like you'll never do it again. And I thought,
Right.
That's interesting, right?
I've given this advice during interviews on many occasions, I think. This advice I'm about to give, and you tell me if you think this is like way off base or something like that. Because I don't want to sound pretentious in any of this stuff, nor do I want to be pretentious in a job interview, and I'm conscious of that. Like I don't want to be that guy, But there are times when I'll ask some certain softball questions, like we only have a limited amount of time that we're going to be together, and there are some times where I'll ask somebody, like maybe let's just use the topic of SQL, and this may or may not be the real case, right? But I might be like, hey, listen. As a developer in our organization, I'm going to expect you to know SQL, and you got to know the basics. I'll just blah blah blah. I'll talk about a little bit of what I expect. I don't always go into questions. I'll just say, here's what I expect, and I'm just going to ask you straight up, like, are you cool with that? I don't have time to ask you detailed questions on that because we don't have a lot of time. But let me tell you something. I'll say, this is not the time to like just say yeah, because you're going to be really unhappy in this job. Because I'm telling you, I'm not spending a lot of time on this, but we do this a lot, right? Like I'm honest with them and say, I can't focus on it here, but I'm going to trust you that you're good with this topic, because it's not going to work out well in the long run for either one of us if we're not. And I say it in like a casual way.
I understand what you're saying though.
Is that a crazy thing to say to somebody? I don't know.
people are under so much pressure to because a lot of times you need a job, right? It's super important to our livelihoods. Not always. If you are fortunate enough to get a job when you have a job, it's probably the best time to get a job, because now you also have the ability to walk away if it's not right. But I just don't know who would say, no, you're right. You're right. I'm really not as good at C# as maybe I should be based on what you're telling me. I'm just making something up, right? I don't know who would say it.
Let me give you a different example. Can I use a different example?
Yeah.
Like there's a question I ask, something to do with unit testing, right? And I'll say, like, so how do you feel about unit testing? And some people feel like I will tell you, there are a lot of developers that I know do not like unit testing, right? Mm-hmm. They don't like it. They don't believe in it. And this isn't the time to debate that, right? In this setting right now. But there are people who don't like that, okay? And I'll say, like, listen, how do you feel about unit testing? And sometimes people are going to be like, oh, yeah, no, I think unit testing is great. And I'm going to say, like, listen, we don't have a whole lot of time on this topic, but, like, we're doing unit testing, okay? You don't want to set yourself up to be unhappy here. Like, because a lot of developers think, oh, I'll just tell them I'm good at unit testing. We're not going to do unit testing, right? And there are people that have opinions about that, and I'm not going to tell them they're wrong, but I want to advise them, like, think about the job that you're trying to sell yourself for. If you don't like doing something, and you're going on other interviews, so, like, maybe take that, maybe, be honest with me, say that's not really the thing I'm really that into,
Yeah.
I kind of want to hear that from people. I might try to convince you why unit testing is great right there, but
yeah. Well, so one thing as far as the interviewer is, I try to keep in mind that the interview, and I'm not trying to piggyback on what you said, is it's not about me. So it's not important for me to convince, change somebody's mind, convince them, or show them that I know something, because that's not what it's about. It's about them. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be helpful and friendly and even mentor a little bit. But what I mean is that I've been in interviews where the person basically started talking about, so one type of test double in a unit test is like a mock, and really just wanted to just like, do you write a lot of mocks, or do you use a lot of mocks? And I told him the truth. I said, not really. I don't. I mean, it's not because I think they're good or bad. I'm just answering the question. I don't really use it a lot. This was a very long time ago. So then I got into this whole thing about, like, well, Martin Fowler and this, and I was just like, I think this would be a great discussion when we're colleagues, like at lunch, but in the interview, I don't know. I thought it was kind of strange. It's not about the interviewer and their ability. You don't have to convince me. You're interviewing me.
Right.
So.
Well. So I'll play along with that a little bit, right? So, and it's not the unit testing conversation, any conversation.
Sure,
right?
Any conversation.
Sometimes it's really interesting to see how someone will have that conversation with you. Like,
I get it.
Do you make a good point? Like, why mocks aren't, I could say, do you use mocks a lot? And you might be, no, not really. And I could let that go, or I could ask you why. And you might say, well, let me list 10 reasons why whatever, right? Let me list 10 reasons why I think mocks are an ineffective testing strategy. And here's what I do instead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
That's
no, I didn't have that answer in that particular interview.
Well, right.
But at the same time, it was kind of like, I don't know. So.
Yeah. What I'm saying is, right, you can have that, like, teaching moment. And then what I like to do in that case is, now I'm learning, what is this person going to be like to work with? Because guess what? We are not going to agree upon everything when we work together.
Right.
So how do we have a conversation about the things? How do they teach me? How do I teach them? How receptive are we, to each other? Like, we're building that sort of relationship right there in the interview. I think it's a really good time to
and I
sort of
struggled
talk through
with
something. Now, you can't go too far with it. Sometimes I'll be like, well, listen, I could spend an hour explaining to you why and we got to move on,
I kind of struggled with how to put that, because I agree with, like, this statement that Meg has is absolutely, like, I don't want to put off that it could be an opportunity to provide, like, mentorship is different from, I don't even know how to put it, just proving. I've had interviewers that have made me feel like you're trying to prove I'm not I'm not at your level. I don't think that's what this is about. And I'm having a hard time coming up with the concrete example, and I apologize for that.
I know,
but
just like in an interview, we don't always have the answer.
Yeah,
and I know where you're at because
Meg's statement is right.
Show with you. Sometimes it's so hard to. Sometimes it's so hard to like sort of have the example off the top of our, off the top of our head and get there. So I know where you are because I think we all know, Chris, that you're a thinker, that you like to have these conversations. So anyone who's watched the show before, I don't think they're hopefully not judging you on that.
Yeah, like what Meg said is absolutely right there at the end. The fact of the matter was I simply wasn't well versed in mocking strategies, although I actually could talk about what mocks were. I just wasn't well versed in using them, and I didn't have a good answer for the interviewer, and so I just went with it. But it turns out I
gave an honest answer.
Yeah, it was an honest answer. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just thinking. It's a similar topic here. As an interviewer or as an interviewee, what do you think of this concept here? What do you guys think about an interviewer telling a candidate that they are wrong about something? And I mean something like not an opinion, but like, 2 + 2, and they say, oh, 2 + 2, yeah, that's 5, and it's not, right? Do you just say like, oh, okay, or do you correct them? And as an interviewer, as an interviewee, what do people think about that, being told when they have the wrong answer?
So, I'm rolling back through history, trying to recall if this has specifically happened. But, it's probably going to depend on how confident I am about the topic. I tend to have a lot of imposter syndrome and sometimes assume that maybe there's some nuance I'm not aware of, and I don't want to assert it too strongly and then find out later that, wow, I actually could have learned something just now. But let me give you a concrete example that I would go to my, I would fight for, because I know, is if somebody said to me, like, if I don't know why this would come up in conversation, but if they said like, oh yeah, what I really love about Git is it's so efficient because each commit only stores the diffs between the previous commit, which is a common myth. And I would probably say like, well, no, Git commits are the entire encapsulation of the snapshot. I mean, you can walk a commit down to the actual blobs and the actual tree, which is the folders, and the blobs, which are the files. But I know that topic. I mean, I know it. And it's not to well actually them. It would be more to say like, well, that's not actually really how Git works. And maybe that's a relevant question to the interview. I don't know why it would be, but I'm picking it out because it's something that I'm confident talking about. Whereas even if we were talking about something that might surprise you, something that you'd say like, but I feel like you would know a lot about this. We've done a lot of C# new features on this show. And if you said to me in the interview, like, oh, I really like expression bodied members because it turns out that I found that I could take them and I could mark them as internal and then they would show up in something, and I would be like, huh, I'm not 100% sure if that's accurate, but I'm also not 100% sure it's not. So I would let that go. I really would. I would just be like, okay.
So in the comments, if I'm reading this right from some of the comments, don't mind being wrong when I'm wrong, but you need to watch if someone is so opinionated. There's only one way to do everything. Yes, I'm with you, Try Goofy. I'm not talking about those like, no, like let's talk about unit testing and someone says, yes, you should use unit testing. Oh, wait, like that kind of opinionated. I'm talking about, I've had people give me like actual wrong answers to something.
Yeah, right.
And,
like you said, 2 + 2 is 5 was your example.
Right. Or like, and I don't ask questions like
these are facts.
Often, but let's just say someone said to you, like, what's the max, like one of these interviews, like, what's the maximum size of an integer?
Yeah.
Right. And someone said, I'm pretty confident, 512 maximum for an integer. I don't think it's wrong to say, well, I just want you to know you're wrong on that, and tell them the answer. Right. That's a bad example, right?
I know it's hard to come up with them, right? But you're like, it's an unsigned bite. What's wrong with you?
I'm trying to come up with something that can be like factual, because I think it's kind of important to be honest with a candidate and have them know where. I also tell people when they have a really good answer to a question, I'll be like, yeah, nice, nailed it. You don't even have to go any further. I'm with you on this. Like you've got this. I like to give them the honest feedback. Now, if they give me 6 wrong answers in a row, I don't keep telling them they're wrong, they're wrong, they're wrong, right? That's not what this is about. But um, but I do try to give people. I want them to know at the end of the interview like how they did.
Okay.
Like I want them to understand. Sometimes I say to them, "Hey, listen, I got to be honest with you. I threw that question out just to see how we're going. I didn't even know the answer to that. Like, don't worry, you could Google that when you're here. Like,
Yeah.
I know.
Sure.
That's why I don't usually ask those questions.
Right.
Like, what is the maximum size for an integer? Because Google it. Who cares? But um, but there are times when people are wrong, and it's like, oh, and let's see how that, not, I don't think, God, I pray that I don't say it in like a jerk way. Like, no, that's wrong. Like not like that, but like, oh, okay. Or that's close, but you had the right idea, but it's not exactly what I was looking for kind of thing. I don't know, something like that. And I'm not always right about this,
No, I know.
Except in it.
I know. And it's tough because, again, when you get into the technical weeds, there's the difference between being right and wrong, and then even things that are kind of a matter of opinion or maybe just a matter of style, which is such a big factor in this industry is people. And then people have things that they like. Sometimes you get used to a tool and everything, it's your hammer and everything looks like a nail. And so I did like what, we called out the comment earlier, but when Try Goofy had said if someone is so opinionated, there's only one way to do everything, that can be that might not be great, right? Because you need to be.
Oh, yeah.
We're in an industry that evolves and innovates, and we need to be ready, right? So
Yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah, totally.
Another question that I have gotten that can be a stumper, and so I think it's fair to say. Have some ideas for this one because I think it's pretty common. I think I'm right about this. Is you kind of get near the end, that feeling, you can feel it's winding down, and you might even sense it. Here it comes. So, what questions do you have for us?
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily saying you have to have one. I think you can feel like you might, and there may be some interviewers who really are looking for you to show that interest and self-starting inquiry. No two interviewers are alike, by the way, so just keep that in mind. I'm different from Andy, I'm sure, and I'm different from a lot of you in the audience. And so that's the first thing right there is all of this advice goes out the window upon contact with a human being. What are some good ways to respond? And we're getting some. I'm really glad that we might be getting some good answers here. But I'd love to hear from people.
Yeah, and so I want to respond to that. We say you should always leave time for what questions do you have for me, right?
Yeah.
And so let's turn that around on this show right now.
Yeah.
We're getting some answers in here, which are questions, but those are answers to our thing. But as we're getting on time on this show, if people have questions that they want us to talk about in the show, like a topic, like feel free to ask those questions in the chat too, and we'll try to get to some of your questions, not just Chris and my questions for each other. I think Try Goofy actually nailed it. I always think it's one of the best questions when people say, "What does my day look like?" or "What do you expect from me in the first week or month of work?" Like that's a similar kind of question. I think it's a really good question. Now, sometimes people don't have. Some interviewers, you can't ask that to everybody because you might interview with a developer and a manager and some VP who's also interviewing you, and they're going to be like, I don't honestly know what your day looks like day to day. Like that's not a question I can answer, But so you should have a couple of them for different people. But I've had times where I do expect people to have some questions for me. There's a couple of ones that are generally easy. Tell me about the culture in your organization, if it hasn't come up in conversation yet so far. Tell me about a project that you guys are just working on. Or how about this? How about the same question back? Andy, why don't you tell me? Or Chris, you're the interviewer. I'm the candidate. Well, Chris, actually, why don't you tell me about a project you recently worked on that went well? Like you could ask a similar question back to the interviewer. It would be It would be awesome, right? Um, but yeah, CTI Geek, do you work in sprints? And what process do you follow, agile or waterfall? If it hasn't come up, of course, in the interview, I think things like tell me about the size of the team and who will I be working with, one of the best questions that I've ever heard asked as of an interview, and I wasn't at the interview, but my old roommate right after college told me he went on this job interview once. I'll always remember this story. I don't know if he remembers it, but he had already locked up his job that he really wanted, and he still had this interview, and he went on it, sort of as a just in case thing. And the guy said, "Do you have any questions?" And he told me, he goes, "I said to the manager, do you guys have a volleyball team?" I was just like, okay, probably not the best one to go with, but you know, yeah, I see some really good questions come in here. How often do you have one-on-ones with your manager, right? Skip level, by the way, great topic to talk about skip meetings. I would like to have a show on one-on-ones and skips and things like that. That'd be a fun show. I find that typically the answer a lot is I get culture questions. So I will say this, and this is something that people might not like in my interview style. I don't know. I try not to do gotcha interviews, but one thing I don't do, I don't lead with a lot of information about what we do. I find that I've gone on interviews and people have said, well, let me tell you what we do here at our organization. We are, C sharp. I think that F sharp is, I'm just making this up. I think F sharp is trash, right? And we use Angular, and I think Vue, we do not like Vue. We tried to use Vue we hated it, right? And then they're going to come to it, 15 minutes later in an interview question, you're going to be like, so tell me about the web frameworks you've used and which ones do you prefer? And I'm going to be like, oh, I love, I'm not going to give so I try not to give too much information out. I'll be honest. I talk a little bit about what we do. I try to move on to questions for the candidate. So I leave a lot of questions. Like there's a lot of stuff on the table still that I haven't told them about. I've had times where I haven't really even told people what our preferred stack was. It might be obvious, but I might not have said, what version of even .NET we're on or something like that. And, there's questions you can ask, or there's a lot of questions, but I do think it's important. Tabs or spaces. Can I say Loka instead of Loka Samasta Sukinu Bhavantu, who's been with us before, I'm pretty sure, but that's a tough one. Did I say that right? I think I got that pretty close. Tabs or spaces. Like, what a great. Let me explain. Let me tell you why I think that's a good answer. That actually is a good answer. As a good question to ask, tabs or spaces. It might show a little bit of you're kidding around a little bit. Like there's nothing wrong with lightening the mood and being like, well, I'm certainly not going to ask you tabs or space. I don't know. You could have a little fun with a question. But how often? Oh, CTI's got a lot of good questions. How often do you do deployments? Is it well automated? Hopefully, that would be something we have talked about already in the interview because that's a topic that I'm pretty big on. But yeah, I don't know, Chris. What How do you feel if? So, Chris, let's flip this around. You just said to me, Andy, do you have any questions for me? And I say, yeah, definitely. So, what's your time off policy? How does that's always like a thing we're told about, or at least I was always told about. What do you think about that?
Like if somebody asked me that question, that was their flip around question?
That's their only question so far. They're leading in any questions for me.
I mean, if it was obvious and easy for me to answer, I wouldn't have a problem answering it. The reason why that might sound funny is because I have worked at places where it builds over time and I might not have in my head exactly how it works, so I don't want to quote. Like, if I was really in that situation, I'd probably say, my recollection is it builds over time, but you should double check with HR because I don't want to give you the wrong answer. But I think what you're really asking me, and I'm not trying to be coy there because if I know, I'm just going to tell you. I think what you're really asking me is how do I feel about that question versus some of the other ones that you've brought up. And
pretty much.
see, the thing about it is I feel like if that's whatever the answer is, I don't really worry too much about it, because I think maybe what you're getting at is that some people might look at it as though the first thing you're thinking about is vacation, but it's like, well, I hope that we're all taking the appropriate time that we need to stay healthy and and mindful and do a good job, because nobody's worthwhile when they're tired and burned out. So I guess I don't have a negative opinion of the question. At the same time, are there better ones? Probably. But I have a lot of empathy for interviewees feeling put on the spot. So I tend to brush things like that off, like, well, you know, maybe that was the best. Like a lot of times when you see people choke on Wheel of Fortune, and everybody in the living room says, "Oh, that was so easy." I say, "Yeah," and your mind goes blank when you're on stage, you know. So,
yeah, I think So let's put it this way: there's ways to ask questions.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And another way of saying it is, I got to tell you, Chris. Thanks for it's been a great interview so far, and I really appreciate talking with you. And this sounds really good, but I got to tell you, one of the things that's a priority for me is the work-life balance. And I'm just to tell you straight up, like, that's something that matters to me. Can we talk about your, some of those things, whether it's vacation time or, your hours? And I just want to talk about, like, that's a way to phrase it, right?
Yeah, right.
But really more importantly, I guess what I was going back to is, if I feel that there's a lot out there on the table, and like, I'm just surprised when they would say, how many days off, and I might say, well, we get like, 75 days off, which we don't, but 75 days off, and we're pretty flexible at giving it out. Okay, great. Any other questions? And they're like, no. Like, I'm just a little surprised when there's not any other questions.
Well, so we talked a little about work-life balance, and it showed up in chat a little bit, like, what are the working hours and support expectations? And then, as we saw earlier, a question that I think we popped up that we may not have read, I don't remember, was, when was the last time you got paged to fix something after hours? This was before we had this discussion. Was it a bad deployment or something just crashed? I mean, that's learning about not just, like, how on fire is this place?
That is such a great question to ask as a candidate, to try to find out, what are you getting yourself into, right? This is such a great question.
I mean, it's that flip side of it where we always say, easy to say to people that you're interviewing the employer as much as they're interviewing you. Are you going to be able to get up and walk away when you realize, I think I'm setting myself up for weekends and 2 a.m. phone calls? And I don't want it. I don't want that, not because I'm not a hard worker, but because if they don't follow the development practices that I think help you avoid those things, then I don't want to be in that mess, right? So
yeah, again, I think there's a way to bring these up. Like, you could talk about work-life balance and things like that. I think it's also important for a candidate to know, and an employer to know, like, what we're getting ourselves into. And so it's pretty important for the manager to be pretty open about these things and tell people, like, I got to tell you, just, this interview is going great. I do want to, this is a support job. Like, we get calls a lot. That's part of the job. I'm going to give you time off during the week to make up for, I don't know, whatever this situation is. But that it is kind of good to know what you're getting into. I think that it's about phrasing, right? And it's not like, I think talking about, like, who's your customer and, what's the support situation and things like that is a good, like, how many levels of support do you have or something like that could be a way to ask a question, and things like that, but it's interesting. I guess I want to get back to, like, it's good to have questions, right? There's usually something that they might want to, can we follow up on a topic that we talked about earlier or something like that? Like, have something, I used to go into interviews with, like, a whole list of questions that were just generic questions that I knew one of these hadn't been covered I always have something I could throw out at the end of the interview when, like, that I'm sure we could talk about, or could you tell me a little bit more about something we talked about earlier that sounded really interesting? You could even do that,
Right. Yeah. So let me see what else.
What questions do you have?
Do you want to shift gears and talk about real quick, just to have a little fun, what kind of questions might you get that they're kind of out there already? They're called like Google interview questions or whatever. You can, if you search, you will find questions asked at Microsoft, questions asked at Google, questions asked at Amazon. The reason I picked this one is because I actually was asked this question in an interview many years ago.
Can you put that up? By
yeah,
the way,
I will. I'm gonna put it up.
Okay.
I'm gonna get it so we can all see. So it turns out I was asked this question. So here's how I wanna work this. I know everybody watching can Google it. I know everybody watching may have heard it, but let's avoid. What I really want to discuss more is how you approach it. I don't know that I care so much about the answer, but I'm interested to see if Andy can think it through. So the question is there's 25 racehorses, and what they don't really say here is that each of these they kind of say it. The racehorses always run. Each of these horses individually always runs the same time. It doesn't matter what the track conditions are. It doesn't matter what day it is. Doesn't matter if they're hungry or not. So no trick question. The horse always runs at the same time. But you don't have a watch, so you have no way to record the times. And you can also race 5 horses at a time. So essentially what we're saying is that horse A will always beat horse B. Always. That'll always happen. If you race any 5 of them, it'll always be the same result. But you don't have a watch. So the question is, what's the minimum number of races that you need to identify the 3 fastest horses? Now, this is not a technical question. Try Goofy asked if it was a Brooklyn Nine-Nine episode. I was asked this question before Brooklyn Nine-Nine went on the air. and it was a question where the interviewer, I think, wanted to both see how I worked it out, but also did say, let's talk it out. It was trying to get me to maybe, I think and it was a he who asked the question. I think he didn't want me to just get up there and think like I have to reason it out, is that it was okay to say we're reasoning something out. That's hard to simulate in an interview though, because he knows the answer. So yeah. I don't know what you think.
I'm just going to tell you straight off that I'm immediately, and even right now, I'm like sweating. Like, oh my gosh, this is a kind of question that I'm not really enjoying as an interviewee. Mm-hmm. And maybe people sort of agree with that. Like, I'm already like thinking, oh my gosh. Like, so I guess I would start thinking it through, and I would say, well, let's see, there's 25 horses. So you only need to find out the top 3 horses. You can race up to 5 horses at a time. So in the first race, you've got a winner.
Right.
I think you then want to identify the fastest 3 horses. I'm not really good at this stuff.
And that's
this is
okay.
like the kind of puzzle that really stumps me. But I'm thinking you would say something like, well, if we race the first 3, we get the first 5. We know who the fastest horse of that is, right? Mm-hmm. So now, maybe I take the first 3, the winners, and I start to add 2 more horses to them. But no, because the third horse is going to always lose to the first horse. I don't know. The fastest 3 could all be in the first race, yeah, but the 5 fastest can all be in one group. They could. But I'm thinking there's something about this, which part of the trick is that you don't need to double test them. Once the horse is faster than the others, we know that and I'm thinking maybe we want to find the losers.
Right.
What's that?
No, go ahead.
I thought I heard you. Yeah. I wonder maybe the trick is to find the losers. And tuck the losers out of this thing. I don't know. So I'm kind of interested, but
to show you this.
Sorry, I'm not trying to cut in with the audio. Yeah, I wasn't trying to do that, but what I wanted to do was also get an answer that we can use up, because I'm not trying to put a ton of time into it, But why don't I go ahead and so like how you work it out is interesting. When you get asked like an interview question, well, let's go ahead and talk about it, and then we can talk about what I kind of really want it to be is how do you work things out in an interview question, right?
So exactly. I think that's an important aspect. That's why I would probably say that, I would start to give some ideas and say, well, I'm just throwing out some ideas. This is what I would do in a normal situation. Maybe I would write some ideas on a whiteboard, and I would try to keep a list of some suggestions, like just show how your thought process or something like that would be what I would do.
Right. So as people have pointed out correctly, it's possible that you might get lucky in the 5 fastest or in the first race, or maybe if they could, or something like that. So the foolproof way is that you run them into groups of 5, and now what you're going to get out of that is that at the very least, you can't be the fastest overall horse unless you won one of those 5 races. So That's going to get you one of them. However, now what you got to do is you got to figure out, okay, now that I have the 5 fastest horses, what else do I do?
But you don't know you have the 5 fastest horses, because the second fastest horse could have been the one that lost.
I'm sorry. I didn't say that correctly. You're right.
Okay.
In order to be the fastest horse overall, you got to win your race. So if you take the 5 winners and race them, you're now going to have your fastest horse overall. But,
certainly, yes.
But like what they say here is they say, label the 5 groups. And what you're doing is you're basically saying you have an A1, an A2, an A3, an A4, and A5. And it's basically what race were they in and what place did they come in. And you're going to need a race where you take the second place winners. You take some of the second place winners and some of the third place winners and race them, and whoever comes in, whoever the fastest to must be the second and third fastest overall. And it was interesting to work this out, but I don't necessarily know. So we can talk about a lot of things here. Are they good questions? Are they good interview questions? Are these even questions that really were at? So I've heard this interview question as well, right? A riddle type question. So Andy, tell me how many piano tuners you think there are in New York. New York City.
Yeah.
And I believe the purpose of these questions is to try and find a non-technical way to just see how you reason things out. Now, the Google one, I actually think that you are supposed to figure out the right answer. But the piano tuners in New York City is a different one. I don't expect, like if I asked you that question, you're not going to give me the actual answer. But I'd be curious what you think about it.
Yeah, well, there's no way to know that. Right. Well, I tell you what I would probably say, right? And it's an interesting answer. But I would probably say, can I Google that? And the reason I'm saying that is because I want to show them that, like, I know what tools I have at my disposal.
Okay.
Right? And if I'm working, I'm going to do research on things. I don't need to know everything when I can easily find the answer, right? But then you would probably start off by, like, you want to start off, if likely they're going to say, no, you can't Google that, right? So then I would say, well, let's try to figure something out, right? And I guess you could sort of go and say something like, well, how many people are in New York to start with, right? I think that's the first number you could figure out is how many people are in New York. And then I would probably say, okay, let's just take a guess and say that, like, if I think about my friends, like, how many of them play the piano or something like that, and try to get to some point where you can figure out how many people play the piano. And then you might think about, like, well, what would it take to service those people? Like, how many pianos are there in New York, right? There's not going to be more tuners than there are. Oh, I like this one. Ask for yellow pages and then count, right? Exactly. That's a good answer, though, right?
Yeah.
Because, that's what you would do if it happened at work and someone said, hey, we're going to write software. If my business unit came to me and said, we want to write software for piano tuners. Do you think that's a good idea? Is there a business opportunity there? We would need to find out how many piano tuners there are. Well, what's the easiest way to find that out, right? So, but I would probably try to use some sort of numbers and figure out, well, how many pianos do I think there are? How many piano players? How many piano, something like that. I would probably work through that. Now, I don't know if you're expecting us to work through that right now.
Let me ask you a question. Like, what might be the first thing so let's say I was interviewing, and I want to talk later about these kinds of questions, but I thought it might be a little bit of a diversion, right?
Yeah.
So
sure, yeah.
You said how many people live in New York City, and I'm willing to say, well, let's say it's 8 million for purposes of this question.
Yeah.
So what's the next thing you'd want to figure out?
Yeah, so I'm going to say, well, let's go with some numbers, right? Like, I certainly think that we know it's less than 8 million piano tuners at that point, right? I mean, that's a fact. We know one thing, right? We know it's more than zero. Well, we don't know that it's more than zero, to be honest. It could be zero. There might not actually be any piano tuners in New York City. You couldn't actually tell me that there were off the top of your head, right, without knowing that. And I might talk about some of that stuff to show that I understand that there's not always a definitive answer to something, and it could be deceptive. But we're going to start with it. It's less than 8 million, right? And then we're going to say that I think there's a good chance that it's less than 4 million. You know what I mean? Like, sort of, how do we work our ways down into big chunks? It's certainly like not 1 in 2 people, and say, well, let's just say 1 in 100 people play the piano. I don't know if that's a good number, but I could maybe use that as some like swipe at it.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And say, well, if there's 1 in 100 people, then how many possible piano players are there in New York? So that's, what is that? I don't know.
I guess you cut it down to 80,000, right? 80,000 times 100 is 8 million. Did I get that right?
I don't know. That seems small. I think there's got to be more than 80,000 piano players in New York. In all seriousness, I almost feel like that's low when I say it like that. Out of 8 million, is it 800? Is it 800,000?
Well, 800,000 would be 1 in 10.
That would be, yeah,
right.
1 in 10. Yeah. Okay. So all right. So good. So we're down to where are we at? 80,000.
So you're guessing there's about 80,000 piano players.
Yeah. Right. So there's 80,000 piano players, right? Let's just assume that they all own a piano.
Okay.
Maybe that's a good assumption, right?
All right.
So okay. So if it takes,
so now
you could sort of say
you just determined there's 80,000 pianos. Then is what you basically done.
Did.
Okay.
I think I mean, again, I don't know that, but right, the 80,000 pianos. And then I'm going to think and say, well, how long does it take to tune a piano? And let's just say, I've never tuned a piano. I did have someone tune a piano once as a kid in my house, and I think I don't know, but let's say the person was there for, let's just say it takes 2 hours to tune a piano. So what I'm trying to get at is, and then how often does a piano need to be tuned? Mm-hmm. And then think, well, how much work is there for a piano tuner in New York? And I think we could use maybe like a supply and demand kind of thing and say, well, obviously there's not going to be 80,000 piano tuners because that just doesn't meet the demand. Like, the demand is lower than that, right? So I don't know. Let's say people tune their piano once a year, and that's probably generous because a lot of people don't ever tune their pianos, but let's just start with that. So once a year a piano gets tuned, and it takes 2 hours to tune a piano, and there's 40 hours in a week. So I could divide the work week, and again, I could think about travel times and stuff like that, but I could come up with some average that an average piano tuner can tune 10 pianos in a week, right? So if I'm right that there's 80,000 pianos, I'm not writing this down. I should be writing this down, but like, you see where I'm going.
So here's what I want to do. I want to go ahead, because this isn't meant to interview you. I want to compare you.
How am I doing?
I want to compare it to somebody who also broke the question down. And here's what I like about this. You asked a lot of the same questions, which is great. How many people live in New York, right? And now you came up with this 80,000 number. That's not important to me. It's not important to me. What's important is you tried to figure out how many pianos there were. And then you said, now how often do they have to be tuned? And then you said, now how many piano tunings could one do? Now, you did happen to hit some of the same answers, but to me, what's more important is that you were asking the same progression of questions.
Right.
So the purpose of the question is actually to figure out how do you break down large problems.
Right.
I don't really even care about the rest of the article, although I'm happy to say, if you'd like to read Michael Taylor on Medium, how many pianos are there, tuners are there in New York City, a quirky interview question, how much would you charge to wash all the windows in Chicago? My understanding is that these questions they've been attributed to tech companies and other companies to try and figure out how you break down large problems.
Right.
Do I like this method of questioning that I just gave you? I'm not particularly sure that I do, because I don't know. Right. I just personally don't know what we're getting here. Right. I sort of see the idea of working through an abstract problem. In fact, maybe that's a good one where instead of being as silent as I was, I try to have the conversation with you, but I want to see that you're asking the next question. Like, I was willing to say, let's just go with 8 million for population of New York. But then I was curious, what's your next question going to be? And you went with, well, how many of them play the piano? And I didn't care that you could, that on the spot, you were like, well, 8 million divided by 10. Like, doesn't matter. If we're going to go with 1 in 100, then let's make it 80,000. I'm going to judge you on the human calculator part. Who cares? The point is you made the next, you broke the problem down. Okay, so now that we're at 80,000, what do we need to do next? And some people like to ask those to just get an idea of your group problem solving.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there as what you and people in the chat think.
Yeah. So first of all, there's one thing I want to say that I think, and having looked at that answer, I'm really frustrated with myself on the one part that it's in my head now. Like, yeah, sometimes there's more than one person in a family that plays the piano. There's average of certain people in a family. And I'm like, oh, that's an interesting perspective, but that's not important, right?
Right.
I don't like these questions, and I'll tell you why. I like them a little bit. I like open-ended questions. I think there's other ways to ask open-ended questions. I think for me to figure this out, I don't know, how long did we just spend on that? And is that the best use? Like, I think of interview time as valuable. Like, I have more questions than I can ask in an interview, because and I think I remember saying this when we had this topic last time, where we just talked about it a little bit. There are so many things. If someone's coming in on like a senior level, like not a junior level where we don't expect as much from them, but I have so many topics I need to talk with them about, right? Add, language questions, add Azure, talk about SQL, let's talk about DevOps, let's talk about, all kinds of things. And I've got them for a half hour. Well, I probably got them for an hour or something like that, maybe even a little more. And I'm concerned about the amount of time it takes to get that answer. And by the way, I was looking at the chat during that last answer, that last question, and I want to say, I'm a little disappointed in you people in the chat. That where was the help? I was looking for like some people throwing out some suggestions for me. Okay, you guys left me hanging there. You left me flailing in the wind. Look at Andy. I hope you all got a good laugh at watching me suffer through that interview question. Although I did see the 8 million. I did see Loka with helping with a little math there. But where's the theory? You guys were leaving me hanging. So you all know I'm just kidding with you. But I don't know if it's a good. I don't ask those kind of questions.
Yeah. I understand. I just I was curious because I'm curious if people in the chat, like, are you getting those kinds of questions on interviews, or is it pretty much kind of the ones that we've covered tonight, and also the technical questions? Like, I remember that I think I was asked a long time ago, like, what's a use for a, oh gosh, I was trying to think. It was a C++ question, like, when would you use? Oh, it was something about when would you use a, not when would you use a copy constructor. It was something that's specifically about abstract base classes, and it's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know when the right time is. How technical do you want to get, things like that? I'm definitely curious to hear what people think. And I didn't mean to bring those questions up to say that you should be prepared for these, but I've been asked them. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting.
have you gotten the ones like, hey, show us how to implement a linked list? How do you reverse a string in place?
I kind of feel, I feel like I can Google that.
Okay.
I can Google that if I want to know how to reverse a linked list. I tell you what, developers copy and paste a lot of code from Googling things, from blogs, from tutorials, from all kinds of things, and that's fine, right? I want to know that someone can, how they think, what parts of the job are they passionate about, and what are they, what best practices do they like, and stuff like that, and how do they learn, or whatever. Like I guess there's a lot of ways I could go with that, but to ask, like, the linked list question or how to reverse a string, even if you know how to do it, you might Google it anyway just to get the line of code quicker or something like that. So again, I don't tend to ask those kind of questions.
Brendan says at Amazon, implement an LRU cache on a whiteboard. I mean,
I don't even know what LRU is. What's LRU?
Well,
yeah.
I'm not going to make it at Amazon, it seems. But yeah,
No.
I mean, I've had that opinion that you should be able to code on a whiteboard, and I'll be honest, I'm not very good at doing that. I'm not very good at that. It's we got to talk up front, or that's it.
Yeah, to CTI geeks, I will ask about design patterns, but I don't ask them to implement anything. I have sometimes whiteboard out something, but I'm always very clear, first of all, on the whiteboard that this is pseudocode, right? You don't get points off for forgetting a semicolon at the end of the thing, because it's pseudocode, right? But I do ask sometimes even about design pattern kind of questions, like, give them a sample of some code and say, well, how would you do this, a little more single responsibility? And instead of typing it on, what kind of methods would you call, or something like that, sort of see someone break down a problem or design something. Again, it depends on the level they're at. I do, the whiteboard thing comes up, it's always been a staple of mine to ask some whiteboard questions. And the answer to the question is not always the most important thing that I'm looking for in a whiteboard question. Now, I'm a little concerned. The reason I'm asking this is I kind of want to know what people think about this for the new world of virtual interviews. But depending on the level, again, we're taking into consideration, let's say you're hiring someone at like a senior level or higher. Being able to get up in front of a whiteboard is an important skill, right? How is this person going to do in a room with developers, maybe more junior than them? How are they going to demonstrate something at a whiteboard? Are they comfortable speaking and explaining things and, sort of scribbling up and trying to wing it in front of some people a little bit, right? And a lot of what I'm looking for is that simple thing. And I can tell you there's a story from quite a few years ago. I worked at an organization, and I was not in the interview in this case either, but the person who was the interviewer came down and he told us all after the interview, he goes, well, that didn't go well. He's like, I asked this person to get up in front of the whiteboard, and they said no. They're like, no, I'm not. And they kept saying, I can answer the question, but they didn't want to write it on the whiteboard. And, that's, excuse me, that's something of an extreme case, right? But,
yeah.
Excuse me. But, there is something to be said for, like, you want to see how someone can do with some of these things. How do I do that on a phone screen, on a phone interview or a Zoom interview? Does anybody have any, ideas how you find these things?
Well, so I think if you need them to if you need somebody to actually draw, I believe that most of these clients nowadays have that kind of feature. But I think as the interviewer, you probably need to be comfortable with it so that you can help somebody who maybe hasn't done it before. Like for example, in a Slack call, you can draw, and then what happens is that by default, and I don't know if you can change this, is the drawing kind of fades away, and maybe this is all you could do it. So I think you just have to be ready, because to expect that somebody would be able to just bring up a whiteboard type thing on demand. But on the other hand, I do think it's probably fair game that somebody could bring up Notepad or the editor of their choice, and maybe at least type some things in there, even if it's just pseudocode or just wanting to put, like, I can't write on a whiteboard for you, so let me type into this.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, some people have said, you can, and you said, we can use some of the tools that are built in for drawing, but drawing with a mouse is pretty hard. If someone doesn't have it like I do here with a pen right nearby, this is a Surface, pen. It's not easy, and I'm just trying to think of how I'm gonna. But how am I? Let's take the whiteboard part out of it. How do I get? I guess I just have to ask them to. I like people to explain things to me, and so maybe I just have to ask it's a different question, but I'm going to get the same result, which is to ask them to explain something to me. And if they can do that, over a Zoom meeting or something like that, then I guess I'll get that same answer. I guess there's other ways to find that out. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, Chris, what do you think about? And again, I'll say, if people on the chat have other comments, by the way, chat's been great tonight.
Yeah, thank you all very much.
Killing
it, right?
A lot of really great
comments.
We love when we have a show like this. It's interactive and fun like that. So if you have questions, we're getting there probably on time. Like we're probably going to wind this show down. But if there's a couple of questions, maybe we can take those. So feel free to ask. But what do you guys think about? And Chris, what do you think about code samples in advance? Like I've heard stories about people saying, "Send me like some code that you've written." So is that right? You've written.
Yeah. So I don't think I've personally been asked that. I have been asked to maybe complete a short task ahead of time. The most famous example of mine, which I did share on the previous show when we were kind of talking in general about it was a more general conversation. We tried to drill in on the interview this time. Was the interviewer had sought out my GitHub repo, and that turned out to be a bonus because he expressed that he really liked some of the projects and some of the code. But I think it's kind of the next level of saying, hey, I just want to make some people, they're really concerned. They want to make sure that they're not getting somebody who can pass a quiz but then can't actually use the tools or the product. I mean, I don't know. I just don't know, though. How do you craft that it just isn't like another gotcha style thing? You know how to do this one type of thing.
Yeah.
And let's be honest. I mean, people are busy, and I mean, I'm not trying to say that they don't want your job, but they're giving you time for the interview, and now it's, can you put in some more time on the weekend or something? Like when are you going to do it? So
yeah. Well, I think CTI Geek, hey, thanks for joining us. We'll hope to see you next week, Wednesday nights at 8:30. We're around 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for coming by. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a couple problems with that code sample thing. I mean, one is, when is the person going to have time to do it? And that's kind of unfortunate. But, again, what does it really tell me? I guess, they could they certainly can find whatever answers they want, and best practices online, and sort of craft the perfect code. And I would obsess with it, like, is it the perfect code? Oh my gosh, what did I name that variable? The best name possible. Like, it would seem really hard to judge. I don't know. I've never asked for code samples. I have asked people to code in an interview, and I find that that's kind of tricky, but I think that might be better in a virtual interview. This is a place where I think a virtual interview could go well, because one of the worst things that I feel when I ask someone to code in an interview is the first thing I start with is, I give them this. I give them my keyboard, or a keyboard. I actually don't usually use my own keyboard. I have an extra keyboard in my office for interviews. But I give them a keyboard. And guess what? We all know that we can type on our keyboard. And like right off the bat, by asking someone to type on a keyboard that they're not like familiar with, it's like, oh, that can be really like awkward. I'm being sincere. Like, it's awkward to type on a different keyboard. So I think in a virtual environment, they've got the tools that they like on their machine. I think it would be smart for me to tell people in advance that I'm going to want you to have a certain tool open, assuming you have that on your computer, right? Or one of two, things. Like, I might say either have VS Code or Notepad, even, like, depending if we're going to do some pseudocode. Give people the chance to have the tools in advance. And I'm just thinking this through off the top of my head, right? Let them make sure they clean their environment if they want to hide certain things, tools, or whatever. One of the problems I always had with asking people to code on my machine is, I have ReSharper, and it would start doing things for people, and they wouldn't be used to that. And I just felt it was very very uncomfortable situation. But I do like people doing like some code samples in person. And I'm kind of looking at some of the chat here to see, like, make sure you sanitize it right. Right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with Brendan there, because I have a lot of empathy for the interviewees, having sat through some things, and I get to where, like, boy, I'm not even sure what to ask anymore. Like, everything is terrible, right?
Which question is Brendan asking?
Oh, he was just saying, as Brendan McKenna was saying, as somebody who sat on the other side of the table for so long, I have a lot of empathy as the interviewer. I'm not sure the right questions to ask after having been through so many bad experiences. So,
right, it's hard. It's a tough process. But I do like doing some coding samples, and I'm curious to know what kind of things people have asked or been asked to code in an interview, and like how detailed and setting expectations and things like that, is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of tricky to come up. I do try to have some samples, and I have thought them through about like what code would look like. And I try to like work with the candidate like through that. Like, you talk about paired programming, and I saw someone had a comment about paired programming. I mean, I do try to be like involved. Like, I don't just sit there quietly. I'll be like, when I see them struggling on something, I try to jump in and say, well, I think you're going in the right path there. I see what you're doing there. That's you're onto it. And I see them struggling with a name, and I said, it's okay. This is an interview. Like, I know you're going to struggle on a name or something. Don't worry about that. Or watch what they do. Try Goofy. This is a great one. I've done this. Code with a bug and watch them try to fix it. And I think that is a really good thing to do. I think it shows a lot of skills, and it can show a lot. And then they're not like writing the code necessarily, but you can watch them. Are they comfortable with the tools? How do they step through? Do they understand like tips and ways to find things? And you could bury some subtle things in there. You could have all kinds of different answers to some of that stuff. And I think that's a good exercise. Yeah, sure, use breakpoints, use whatever you want to use. And I think that is a good strategy. And I guess you could have a couple different things set up in advance. Now, so how about this? So if you're going to debug the code in a virtual interview, I need to provide code. So what would I do? I guess I would put it in a Git repo and ask them to pull the code down,
I suppose today, huh?
or yeah, you know what I'm saying? Because they're not like in at the computer. And is that a fair assessment? I mean, Git might not be a requirement, so someone might not have Git installed. Not everyone uses Git, right? And that wouldn't necessarily exclude you from certain jobs, right? So,
Or
what would
should they
be an
have to have
easy
their
way?
home? Should they also have to have their home computer set up for software development? Right? Like, is that,
Right.
it's not, it's, you haven't given them a work computer that has the general tools that
Yeah.
you would expect.
So
So
what about some stuff we've talked about before, like where we have this cloud-based UI or something like that, where they could what's that called in
well, I mean,
.NET,
there's
I
a lot
guess.
of them you could use. Like currently, there's like the GitHub Codespaces stuff, but there's other ones too. I mean, there are
Right.
plenty of environments. If you're, we've talked about them on this show. A lot of the web-based environments that you can use
Right.
to spin something up, and I'm thinking some of them. I'm thinking about how you would share them with somebody. You
Well,
probably
Loca's
will.
got the answer.
You probably will have
Loca's
to
got
teach
the
them.
answer.
Yeah, I mean,
Loca's like live share, right? Give them a link.
yeah,
It'll open up with the project and code automatically downloaded. That is probably the answer. Thank you, Loca. Winner, winner.
yeah. Now,
Um,
I was thinking a little bit about like something that'll open in a browser in case the computer they're on, where they're like, well, I don't have Visual Studio.
yeah.
I don't have, I don't even have this computer doesn't have Visual Studio Code installed. I don't put
Right.
development tools on it. I'm not trying to
Yes.
say a person's being obstinate if they say that either. It just might be the truth. So
Yeah. So I think. So first of all, I think these are things we want to think through in advance. I did kind of touch upon this before, and I'm thinking out loud here because I haven't done this yet. But I think we need to tell them expectations. Like, will you be able to have a computer that has Visual Studio or VS Code, in the .NET space or something, one of those tools? If you're a Java developer or something else, or even someone's JetBrains. Like, I don't know Rider, but guess what? If you can do your code examples in Rider, fine with me. It probably works great. You could still use that tool. If they don't have that tool, um, well, that's interesting. And then we would have to come up with an alternative, I guess, for them. Um, is that it? So I know I'm kind of back on that. So I could be wrong here, but what do we think about that person that doesn't have? And I'm being serious here. Candidate doesn't have a computer with Visual Studio or VS Code or something like that on there.
in your space, they're interviewing for one of your positions, right? So it doesn't matter the position. Can they do software development on their own personal equipment? Is what we're saying, right?
Well, I'm not asking them to use their own personal equipment from once we hire them. Let's say we're going
No,
to provide that
but
for them or something.
we're interviewing though, and remotely.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, I guess that it comes down to the interview question of, is it okay for a software developer to not have an environment where they could play? Or like, what does that tell me? And some people could get really mad at me here on the show and say, hey, we work 40 hours a week at work or whatever, or I use my work machine even in the evenings, and I try things on my work machine, but that's my work machine and I'm not using it for a job interview,
Yep.
which is fair. But am I overjudging people? And I'm thinking, wow, you're a developer and you don't have some sort of personal environment?
They might also
don't know.
not have a space. Like, what if they just have laptops, or they don't have a machine that has a webcam? I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't feel like necessarily you can hold that against people just because I like to have a setup like this. Doesn't mean that
Right.
everybody can or should. It may not be the most important thing to them.
Yeah, and is the webcam required? And listen, you don't know where they live or what kind of environment that they're in. Not everybody has the greatest home life, and that might not be the candidate's fault, right? So how do we? That's another good question. Is a webcam required? Can it be?
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a new era of those kind of interviews. I mean, there's certainly some companies that were already hiring remote and already making that kind of part of their practice, but more are adopting it. and it'll
Right.
be interesting to see what happens.
I'm just trying to ask honest questions of us all and say, like, I don't know. I hadn't thought about some of these things before. Um, these are tricky scenarios, right?
Yeah.
Um, anyway, what are we doing here? It's
Well,
been
I
a pretty
mean,
long show, right?
yeah, it has been. It has been. And maybe real quick, if you want to run through where people can find us, if you've joined us for the first time tonight, thank you very much. Really appreciate everybody. We had a long chat scroll tonight. Tried to get a lot of your comments online and talk through them. Really do appreciate everybody participating there. And even if if you are here and you've watched and you didn't want to join in that's fine. We're glad you're here. That's the number one thing. We're glad you're here. Thank you for spending time with us. And if you want to know more about how to find us, we have a Twitter account that's just the Dev Talk Show. And then most importantly is YouTube, youtube.com/the Dev Talk Show. And you will see the past videos plus the one that's live right now, developer interviews. And then for a future schedule, when we have especially when we book a guest or we kind of know what's going on in the next couple weeks, that gets put here on the meetup.com/the Dev Talk Show. Definitely go to Meetup and type in the Dev Talk Show and you will find this group here. Just because Meetup says it's in Malvern, Pennsylvania, don't worry. This is an online show, Wednesdays at 8:30 p.m. And if you want to see some old episodes, you can watch. We had this awesome talk. Heck, I think it was February of last year. We got to talk with Carl Franklin on site at the MTC. That's a great video. That
was fun.
If you enjoyed it tonight and you're watching on Twitch, hit that follow button and you'll be notified when we go on Wednesdays at 8:30 U.S. Eastern Time, which is currently, even though that is wrong, that's currently UTC -4. And those of you, if you're watching on YouTube, there's a subscribe button there too. And you've got the whole back catalog. And please let us know what you think. Let us know in the comments. Hit the like, hit the unlike. That way we know which topics you want us to come back to. So, Contrive DX, thank you for the great conversation and a lot of folks who gave us questions that were asked. What are you looking for in interviews? What are you enjoying and not and don't want to see in an interview? And Andy, if you think we're ready, we can get ready to sign off here.
Yeah, we can wrap it up. So Chris is going to get ready to push the magic button there. Thanks again for joining us. Hope to see you over the next couple of weeks. Pop in, say hi when you're here if you feel that's right. That's what Chris is saying. And you know what? I'll give you another ask. Tell a friend. If you see us tweet, do me a favor, give us a retweet if you like the show. If you like the fact that we have people's ideas coming to us, and Chris and I, and Rich, we know we don't know everything. We like your guys chiming in on these things. The more people we get, the more ideas we have. So, invite your friends or give us a retweet or something like that. We appreciate it. We have great audience, and we really love you guys. So, hope to see you next week. I will say right now, good night for Andy, for Chris, and for Rich, who's not with us. We hope to see you next week on the Dev Talk Show.